In a quiet, unassuming town, nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, there stood an old house. It had seen better days, its once gleaming windows now clouded with dust, its timbers creaking and groaning with the weight of years. The house had always been there, long before the townspeople could recall, and long after they would forget. It was an old thing, a relic of a bygone era, the kind of house that children dared one another to approach on Halloween night. But there was one thing that set this house apart from others, something that would make the bravest of souls pause and reconsider, and that was the stories. Whispers had floated through the town like smoke for decades. Stories of strange happenings, of things not quite right, of shadows that lingered long after the sun had set. But the most persistent of all the stories was one that sent chills down the spine of even the most skeptical. The shadows beneath the floorboards. People said that the house had a secret, a dark secret hidden beneath the floor of the living room, just beneath the old wooden planks. The first to claim it had been a young girl, no more than 6 years old, who had wandered into the house on a dare. When she returned hours later, her eyes wide with terror, she spoke in fractured sentences, her voice a trembling whisper. She claimed to have seen something moving beneath the floor, dark shapes that shifted and slithered like living creatures. No one believed her. Of course, not at first. But soon after, more children spoke of seeing the same thing, the same dark shapes, the same unsettling movement beneath the floorboards. The shadows, they said, seemed to whisper, beckoning, as if they were waiting for something or someone. Years passed, and the house stood empty. No one dared to live there, but no one dared tear it down either. There was something wrong about the place. And so, the house lingered in silence, its secrets festering beneath the surface, waiting. One evening, on the cusp of winter, a young man named Edward arrived in town. He was a historian, drawn to the old house by the rumors, the whispers, and the allure of the unknown. He had heard the stories, of course, but he was a man of reason, not superstition. He had seen too many old legends fall apart under scrutiny to believe in such nonsense. The house stood before him as he approached, its skeletal frame outlined against the setting sun. The air was heavy with the scent of wet leaves, and the wind carried the faintest sound of creaking wood from within. Edward, undeterred, pushed open the door. Inside, the house was cold and musty. Dust motes danced in the slanted beams of light that filtered through the broken windows. The floor creaked beneath his boots as he walked deeper into the living room, the very room where the shadows had been seen. His eyes scanned the space, taking in the worn carpet, the peeling wallpaper, the faded furniture. But there was one thing that caught his attention, one thing that he hadn't expected. The unnatural cracks in the floorboards. They weren't quite level. In the center of the room, there was a slight depression, as if something heavy had once rested there and left an impression. He crouched down, his fingers brushing the edges of the boards. There was something odd about them, a faint, unnatural shift in the grain of the wood. With a quiet sigh, Edward set to work. Hours later, the room was bathed in the soft glow of his lantern, and Edward had managed to pry up one of the floorboards. Beneath it, there was nothing but darkness. For a moment, his heart skipped. But then, with a deep breath, he reached down into the gap, his fingers brushing against something cold. It wasn't dirt or stone beneath the floor, but something else, something slick, like oil. He could feel it squirming just below the surface. A chill raced up his spine. Something was alive down there. Suddenly, a shape moved in the darkness. Edward pulled his hand back sharply, his breath caught in his throat. The shadows beneath the floorboard shifted again, a mass of inky blackness that seemed to pulse and throb, as though it was waiting for him. A whisper, faint and unintelligible, rose from the gap, the words lost in the creaking of the house. But there was no mistaking the tone, it was calling him. Edward's pulse quickened as the shadows began to writhe more violently. Stretching, reaching up toward him, he backed away, the weight of the room suddenly pressing down on him. The shadows did not relent. They grew more insistent, their whispers rising to a fever pitch. Edward felt someone grabbing at him from beneath the floor. With a final, frantic motion, he yanked the floorboard free. The shadows surged forth in a flood, a mass of darkness that enveloped the room in an instant, choking the air, snuffing out the light of his lantern. In that moment, the house seemed to come alive. The walls groaned in protest as the very foundation trembled beneath Edward's feet. The whispers intensified, drowning out his thoughts. Come closer. Join us. We have waited so long. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything fell silent. The next morning, the townsfolk found the house empty once more. There was no sign of Edward, no trace of him at all. But the floorboards, they said, were different. There was a new shift in the wood, as though something had recently disturbed it. And beneath the floor, something stirred once more. Some things, they say, are never meant to be uncovered. So, if you ever find yourself passing by that old house on a quiet night, do not linger too long. For beneath the floorboards, the shadows still wait, whispering in the dark. And they are always, always hungry.